So a big welcome back to our listeners and viewers of the Responsible Edge podcast, brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted and energized to be joined by Veronica Heaven. Veronica, you and I have known each other for quite some time. I've been trying to get you over the line and get you on the show, and I've finally managed it. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Oh, I'm absolutely delighted. Thank you, Charlie. Really looking forward to our conversation today.
Great stuff, Veronica. Great stuff. Okay, so we have got 20 minutes or so to try and do justice to all the various wonderful things that you have done throughout your career. And by the way, that's me not even waxing lyrical about you. I'm going to wax lyrical about you to an even greater extent at the end of the show when you're not around. But start wherever you like in terms of formative motivations or experiences that help shape and sort of form your view of the world. And then perhaps just talk our listeners through the impact that that's had upon the career that you've led so far.
Oh, wow. That's a big question. Okay, Charlie, thank you for that big question. That's opened up the door for lots of different areas to talk about. So my background, actually, I'll tell you what, growing up, I come from a large family, a very values-led family. As a young girl, I was a brownie. And so I did that whole 3-finger promise, which is, I promise to do my best, to do my duty to God, to serve the Queen, to help other people, and to keep the brown and guard law. So I made that as a promise as a child. I went to, every week, I would go to brownies. And it's one of those things that is a promise that you make, but you never forget it and you kind of stick with it. So that kind of informed a lot of my, how do I do my best? How do I help other people? And it kind of stayed with me. My mum was a nurse and she actually worked on a long stay ward with patients, and she would ask me to come into the hospital with her. And I was a child, I was, not even 11 years old. And she'd go, oh, come on, V, come into the hospital with me. You'll cheer people up. And what my mum didn't recognize necessarily is my mum would see the patient, not the condition. But as a child, you see the condition. And so it was a bit of a challenge for me to get my head around the fact that, oh my goodness. And there were some things that were quite, difficult to see, but actually why that was good is it let me see that there's a world beyond that kind of square that you think, you as a child, that's it. So it kind of made me think about more things than that, that there's more to life than just the simple stuff. How can we help more people? Leaping forward, I've always had an interest in sort of environmental matters and sustainability, which is what we call it now. We didn't used to call it that. It's a relatively new term talking about sustainability. But I've always had an interest in that. I should just take a step back. Yes.
And Veronica, you're probably just about to do this, so apologies if I've just jumped in and cut you off. But what that interest that you already always had in the environment and in nature, like talk us through like what grew that? What affected that?
Well, my dad was actually really very, very, very hands-on in terms of appreciating the importance of land and growing things and gardening. And, he used to do these incredible sort of like prize winning, all sorts of things, but that was on one side for fun. But on the realistic side, he would grow lots of fabulous food that we could eat, because he would say, well, if you've got land, it's really important for it to be productive land, and it's important for you to be able to have things, because it's a joke really, is that my dad would say, oh, there's a flower garden. And then he'd have like a productive garden. Do you know what I mean? So he would really see the distinction between the two. So I always had that kind of understanding that actually, what's around us has got more value than just actually being something that's pretty. Something that's pretty is good, but actually you can do more than that. And I guess just somehow that all these different pieces came together, and, going back to the thing about with my mum and sort of the disabilities and things that she would have to work with through her work as a nurse, and me seeing that, I leapt forward. One of my roles early on, well, not even that early on actually, but I was a non-executive director for a disabled people's organisation. And for me, that was quite a challenge to decide on, did I feel I could really, really support at that level? Because I have no lived experience of disability whatsoever. And that's one of the things that they often ask for. But what I was able to bring to that particular organisation was commercial experience, because I spent a lot of time as well. I was on ExCo, which is the executive committee of a very large business, so a FTSE 100 company. And so I had a lot of very, very good sort of commercial experience I could also bring into other things as well. So yeah, board member of this, lots of different areas. But my appetite has always been about how can, we are here, but how can we do more than what we're doing for ourselves? Can we do something that's going to make a difference? And I think that's kind of been just something that's always just in my mind in terms of how we go about doing things. And it was just very, very natural for me to look into things such as environment matters, which at the time seemed very, very niche. It seemed like an extraordinarily niche thing. But I worked for a forestry pulp and paper. I worked in the forestry pulp and paper sector for a number of years, and that really gives you an incredible grounding in terms of everything from land, people, because there's the whole thing about social affairs and Indigenous people's rights, and basically earth as the lungs of trees, as the lungs of the earth. It just kind of gives you a really sort of like deep understanding that there's more to. That we need to be thinking about more than just the commercial aspects of what you're doing. So yes, you need business to be commercial, but what are you doing? How are you doing what you do? The way that we do business. And so that's always been something that's been of particular interest to me.
And Veronica, and you've beautifully kind of pulled together numerous sort of bits of your experience and sort of formulated that. But I want to sort of almost go through chronologically and just sort of get a real sense for our listeners of the stages. So, you're a young person who's been inspired by your mother and the impact of her role as a nurse, and perhaps some of the exposure that you had to things that were challenging and difficult, but ultimately things that helped you create a curiosity in your mindset, if you like, and an appreciation that there are difficult things in the world, there are uncomfortable things, and that it's important to lean into those things and not just pretend that they're not there. And I presume also, sorry, I'm putting words in your mouth here, but I presume also that kind of exposure to, people in that kind of context, if you like, that actually was the beginning point for a lot of the work that you've then gone on to do in the S, if you like, of the ESG, which we'll obviously touch upon as well.
Yeah.
You've then been inspired by your dad, and he sounds like a fantastic guy. I love the flower garden versus the kind of production garden. That rings very true to some of the experiences that I certainly had growing up. But talk me through kind of, the sort of late teens, like early 20s, like education, what was the idealist Veronica Heaven? Like, what was she like? What was she interested in? And how did that then affect the kind of early part of your career too?
Now, that's really interesting because my early years are very, very, very broad in terms of my experiences. So I don't know if you really want to go there. I don't know if you want to go there.
Shall I ask it?
I'm going to share it with you because it's interesting because all of these, I very much feel that all of these things are almost like stepping stones that help you to go to where you're going next, if you know what I mean. So in my teen years, actually, I was a DJ. I was a DJ, so for a local radio station, which I absolutely loved. I had the evening show. My name was Lady V. Lady V.
That's so good.
And it was brilliant. And actually, I got picked up. I got invited to one of the major radio stations to. They heard me on radio and said, "Oh, it'd be amazing if would you come along?" And I actually went along. I won't name the station, but it is a huge, very, very well known station in London. But they're now all over the place. A very big one. And I went in, and they said, "Oh, we've been listening to your thing. We've had letters in about you. Think you should." But the challenge was, I actually have been working for a very, very long time. I've supported myself for a very long time. And at the time, this particular radio station was saying, well, just come in. So basically like an internship. But bluntly, I couldn't afford to do that. I needed to work, and I needed to work in order to support myself. It's as simple as that. So my parents had already left the country and gone to live abroad in Jamaica. So I was supporting myself from a very young age. So where other people kind of probably think, oh, well, that's great, you have an opportunity to do that. That wasn't a route for me. And that's absolutely fine. And it was a good thing. But I loved being a DJ, really enjoyed that. And of course, the whole thing about presentation and, putting things together and engaging with people. I loved all of that. So I did that early days. I also was in a band as well, musically. So I've done amazing things, like
talented individual
on GMTV and all sorts of things, which is absolutely fabulous. But I did all of these alongside working full time and studying as well, because I did my degree alongside working full time, because as I say, I needed to support myself. So I actually did my degree while I was working full time, which was all fantastic. And then again, just through the degree, and actually one of the things that I really loved was this idea of, actually a lot of things that come to your mind when you're doing when you are studying. And I did organizational behavior became something that was very, very particularly interesting to me. It was one of those things that just, came up in a strong way for me. But from that, and then starting work in industry, and as I mentioned, I worked in forestry, pulp and paper for in that sector for a very long time. And the beauty of that particular sector is that you are literally intersecting with every type of industry. So you work with financial industry services, you work with absolutely every kind of a sector. So it was a great way to sort of learn a lot of different things, and also get an understanding of the motivations and what was happening, if you like, from a commercial perspective in businesses. So what was driving their decisions? Why were they having to act? What was coming down the line? And through all of this work, I then started working a lot with government and central government. And so the work I was doing, I'm sort of leaping into different things, but I was the corporate responsibility director for a very large multi-organisation business, £800 million multi-turnover business. So I did that for a number of years. And again, it just gave me really good insights into the different things and the sort of challenges, and how do you start to pull together sort of strategies, particularly in a multi-organisation business, because the strategies for one may not be exactly the same strategy for the next one. So you still need to make sure that everything's very distinct and different, so that from a consumer's point of view, they have lots to choose from, even though the parent company may be responsible for a number of different brands across that. So I had oversight of that, put together a whole corporate responsibility committee, very senior teams and all those sorts of things, had a very large team working with me, for me, how you want to say it. I could tend to say with me. And matrix organizations, etc. How do you get the most out of your various teams? So all of those things, and the fundamental thing with it was, when you start to look at corporate responsibility as a big business agenda, it is really very, very broad, and it actually touches on everything from your operations, your people, of course, the environment is part of that. It touches on every single part of the business, the commercial aspects of it. So I did that for a number of years, which I loved and enjoyed that. And I set up my own business and consultancy back in 2011. And I thought, I'm going to take a leap of faith in myself, basically. I know I'm doing this really well for lots, for these organizations. And, it's a funny thing, Charlie, what happens is, because when you I worked for the largest company in the sector at the time, and I call it the cloak of the corporate. So what happens is, when you work for X brand name, you can literally walk anywhere. You don't even have to say your name. You say, "Oh, I'm from," and everyone just opens the door. So I had the cloak of the corporate for a long time, and that was wonderful. And through the work that I did, we got incredible recognitions, and supply chain leadership and all sorts of things being recognised through government and through all sorts of different awards and so forth. And then I started my business back in 2011, and I decided that, it's going to be a corporate responsibility and sustainability consultancy, helping clients to find and communicate their compelling message, what makes them different, how they can do better tomorrow than they're doing today, all of that. But alongside that, I really wanted to get involved I wanted to make sure that I didn't just think, okay, this is just about me running a business that's going to make money for myself and for my business. So in addition to setting up the business pretty close in terms of time, literally the following year, early in the very following year, I launched an education program, which is called Briefcases Linking Business and Education. And today we reach up to 1,000 students every year with our programs. And it's such an important part in terms of outreach, and how do you get next generation talent thinking about some of these big issues, some of these big challenges. How do you get them thinking about entrepreneurship? How do you get them thinking about, new business startups, things that can really, really make a difference to the future? How do we get people doing that? So our program is great. I'm very proud of it, and we have it's an industry engagement program. So we have some amazing industry partners that work with us, and long-term partners that work with us. And so basically, in a nutshell, there's sort of three areas. There's an award-winning schools program, which is focused on architecture and sustainability and the built environment. So how can we make what we build for the future look differently? So we get children thinking, they're aged around 12 years old, so it's year 8 students we typically work with in schools across the UK. How do you get young people thinking about how they can develop and make things more sustainable? We talk about net zero, we talk about all of those things, biodiversity net gain. We talk about one of the project we're running at the moment is all around 15-minute neighborhoods. So how do you make communities more sort of stronger together? So we get the children thinking about that. Then the middle part of it and the largest part of the program is our undergraduate program, which is phenomenal. Loads and loads of amazing universities are partnering with us, including in America and in Dubai. And then we also have a postgraduate program, which is called, it's focused on actually working towards a more equitable and sustainable future. So every project is because we've sort of earned our stripes in terms of what we do, all these projects are actually mandatory content within the learning organizations that we work with, because we really want everyone to have an opportunity rather than it to be, I don't know, the competition that maybe you try this or you try that. We want every student to have that opportunity and that exposure, and that's what we do. So all of these things kind of come, and it goes back to that, I promise that I will do my best to do my duty to God. It goes back to that promise. How do you actually not just do good for what you're doing, but do good through the supply chain, the value chain, and how do you get that outreach as well to have as big as impact as you possibly can? Sorry, I've been talking for a lot.
No, Veronica, I absolutely love it. Our listeners will be very happy that I didn't jump in. I think it's absolutely amazing, the breadth and the depth of the things that you're doing. I think the old adage of, when do you find time to sleep and to rest and to sea swim, as I know you do.
I do.
So yeah, it's absolutely incredible. Let me and it's also quite wonderful to see the impact of the Brownie Promise play out throughout a career and a life lived particularly well thus far. Let me ask you about the rest. When you look forward and you think about what you want to do with the rest of your career, and I know you and I I've got first-hand experience, if you like, of your thirst, if you like, for helping and supporting people that are trying to have an impact and do interesting things. So I might be putting words in your mouth by even mentioning that, but what does sort of success of the rest of your career look like for you?
Yeah, thank you. That's an amazing question. So I'm at the stage where what I can do is actually, I'm making an impact, and I can see that broadly. I can really, really see that, see it in the outcomes that we're generating, and the outcomes for the businesses that my business works with, as well as the broader outreach things. But my view is that none of us lives forever. And I think that, it's a stated fact. I think it's fair to say that. So I've been very keen to make sure that what I know can be passed on to as many people as possible in as broad a way as possible. So I'm writing a manuscript, and I'm really just wanting to make it as broad as possible so that what's in here doesn't have to just stay in here. You can actually get it to as many hands as possible so that people can really get hold of it, digest it, have a really meaningful perspective on things, a considered perspective on some of the really challenging questions that we have today in our world, and specifically in terms of responsible business practice, sustainability. Where are things heading? Where should we be looking? I'm also the chair of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the City of London for the Worshipful Company of Entrepreneurs. So in terms of how do we get that reach being broader? So I'm very, very interested in making sure that we have a positive impact, and the work that I do has a positive impact and influences as many people as possible in a way that they can digest, because we all receive information in a different kind of way. So I'm very keen to make sure that, however, all the things that I do really kind of make sure that people can find a way to interact with it and engage with it at a way that they're comfortable with as well. Because, it's not about making a statement saying this is what you should do. Not at all. We have to bring people with us on this journey.
So, Veronica, not only are you a board director, business owner, advisor, NED, but you're also an author as well. To throw that that string into the bow as well, it's quite something. We're going to come on and touch on a little bit
Okay.
more about your latest book during a later part of the show.
Okay.
But I want to ask you a question. Sort of again, I'm switching focus now. I want to ask you a question about how a question or advice that you would offer to a younger Veronica, if you like, perhaps a little bit later than DJing, band playing Veronica. Maybe I'm looking more towards like early days in pulp and paper.
Yeah.
But knowing what you know now and what you've experienced in your career, what would be like the number one bit of advice that you would have offered that 20-something Veronica that you think would have aided her in terms of approaching the rest of her career?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So, I mean, there's some big things that, if you like, lessons from life that I've learned along the way, and I think one of the things we have to recognize, and now sometimes it takes a time for you to get to that point where you can see it, but I think, self-belief is really hugely important, which is that if you've got a good idea and you really feel that you've got a good idea, stick with that good idea and play it out, because one of my number one things that I always say is be consistent in anything that you do. Be consistent, because actually it's the consistency that delivers the outcomes. And so often people go from this bit to that place, and not sure about that. But actually just kind of make a decision on something. And I always say that there's power in making a decision. There is power in making a decision. Whatever that decision is, make that decision, and there's power in it. And then you can create some momentum and moving things forward. So be consistent is what I would say. Have some self-belief, because so many of us have an element of imposter syndrome that we think, are we ready for this? Are we quite good enough for this? And it does take a bit to try and get to that point where you think, oh, actually, no, I may not be able to go as fast as that one, but actually I can still do this. I can still do this, and I can still make a difference. So I think it's that self-belief, and also just saying, okay, well, I'm on my path. I know which way is up. And I'm going to keep going in my path and be consistent in that path. And through that consistency, that's when you start to really attract things, because also people then know what to expect of you, and they can get on board. More and more people can get on board because they say, oh yeah, I understand this, and I know I can come back and do this again. So that's a really important thing. I'm personally, very values led. I'm somebody who believes in long-term, takes a long-term perspective in everything, really. So as a result, when you are making a longer term decision, your decision will typically be a little bit more thought through, whereas a quick sort of moment in time, it's a quick win, which is good, and you can have a short term decision, but actually sometimes the short term decisions don't necessarily deliver a longer term benefit. So I'm typically always been that person who thinks, okay, well, how can I make sure that I get an optimal result from something by doing this a bit further along the line? So that's the advice I would give.
I love that, Veronica. That's that's some brilliant career advice for both younger Veronica, but also I think for anybody else that's out there that to think long term in approaches to things. I could ask you many more questions about you. If I managed to convince you to come back on for another show, I might be able to. But for now, let's move on and perhaps introduce to our listeners this week's article. I think it was a piece by Terry Slavin. I probably butchered that, Terry, so apologies. In Thomas Reuters from September 2024. Veronica, would you mind just providing like a bit of an introduction to the piece, a bit of a summary, and then perhaps highlight whatever the most interesting points were?
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for the invitation to look at this particular article from Terry Slavin, which was focused on Climate Future Leaders 2024. 10 young people are putting the planet first. And so I read that with, just wonderful interest and enthusiasm to see that there's so many dynamic young people who are actually doing what I'm suggesting, which is kind of like having an idea and having something that I think I can do something about this, and then getting behind it. So the article itself covers a whole range of different sectors, from energy in Nigeria to ocean plastic collection, through to there's food there's just so many areas of work that these young people who are all, I think, under 30, identified by Reuters, have been identified, and they're sort of pulling all these different ideas and what they've been doing and how they're trying to make a difference towards climate change, basically. So it's an incredibly interesting article. Very, very good to see what the young people are doing. I think for me, the sort of in Nigeria, there was a Nigerian lady in there. I don't know if you want to go into detail about this at this moment, or shall I just?
Perfect. Give us a little bit of a case study detail of things that we're covering.
Sure. Well, there's a really interesting example of a lady in Nigeria, a young lady in Nigeria. We're talking about energy poverty of her people, despite having such abundant resources in the country. And that was a really interesting point, really, in terms of how do they make use of it, because Nigeria is ranked bottom in the world in terms of electricity access, and they've got something like 230 million people, but 45% of those people lack access to the energy grid. So this woman has actually come up with a way of addressing that and thinking about introducing like a solar system that people can have access, and using microfinance to sort of allow people to have access to these solar panels. And so just really, really good to see this renewable energy solution that's being offered up by a young entrepreneur in Nigeria. That's one example.
Veronica, did I notice that there was something? I think it was like 1.5 million Nigerians have benefited from her company to date. And I just say, I don't know about you, I as soon as I saw that stat, and I just thought, you're under 30, you're building something, as you've alluded to during this show so far, with kind of the foresight, the vision, the self-belief, and then you're impacting that many people's lives. It's just brilliant. Fantastic.
It's absolutely brilliant. And you're quite right. Yeah. So they're making energy reliable and affordable to 1.5 million Nigerians and small businesses. So really fabulous. It's a female-owned solar home system, assembly plant, and the capacity is to produce 250,000 systems per annum. And, there's further benefits in terms of producing jobs and as well as clean energy. So really, really good that such a powerful example. And by the way, the company is called Selfa Energy, established in 2017. So just a really, really good example of an idea, seeing that there's a problem, and actually how would you go about doing something about it. So that was a really good example. Another strong example I thought was the ocean cleanup, which is again a massive, massive challenge in terms of sort of system change. How do you go about doing something like that, and how do you get all the various stakeholders and policymakers and everyone to interact, and business and finance, etc., and just recognizing that all those things take time. But a number of different things. And I think what's also interesting, as I read through the different examples, is that so often it seemed that these young climate leaders are using some element of their work experience, some sort of thing that they thought, oh, I've been learning about this within my work, and saying, okay, well, how can I scale that and do more? So why I love that also is there's that entrepreneurial spirit that they've said, okay, well, I'm working powerfully within an organization, and so I can be an intrapreneur within an organization, but I can also be an entrepreneur and create something that's going to use my skills and experience and my talents and my attitude in a much broader way for other people as well. So there are many examples around that, which I thought was really, really good. A lovely example from a food sustainability platform, data insights and food industry company looking at the environmental impact of food supply chains. Some of my work
that was UK based, wasn't it? Food stamps, is that right?
Yeah, food steps they're called.
Food steps.
Yeah, that's it. So really very, very good. And again, for me, why I thought that was interesting is because that's an example of what they're doing there. They are looking at they're working at it from the point of view of charities and youth-led nature projects, so nature recovery projects. So again, how can you bring somebody with a young person actually with an interest in this, but okay, how can I scale that and make it work for other young people with these youth-led nature recovery projects in the UK? Absolutely. And there's a lot of them, really. There's a lot of different examples. I don't know if you want me to go through a few more.
Well, no, Veronica, we'll obviously link to the piece for guys to have a look at. What I would say is any listeners and viewers out there that want to be inspired by some brilliant young people doing some brilliant things, go and check it out. I want to note one thing, Veronica.
Yes.
When I looked through the list, that I thought was, and this is going to be a sort of a, I don't know if it's going to be a controversial point to make, but it kind of pulls together like some of the conversations that I've been having with different guests on the show about leadership and kind of what we want our leaders of tomorrow, if you like, to look like. And the thing that really struck me was the number of women that were leading these organizations. I don't know if out of the 10, how many were women. I've got that in mind, but I think it was certainly over 50%.
4. Yeah, I think it is actually 3, 4.
Yeah, which was encouraging. And my reasoning for the encouragement of that was that, as I said, I've had a number of shows where we've talked about like what are the characteristics of the future leaders that we want to see. And there's this whole thing around, there's a particular guest I had on called Lauren Wilkinson, who used to be fairly senior in the marketing department of Bacardi. And she has recently done a research piece around interviews with senior, CEOs from around the world, big impact-led organizations. And empathy and compassion as two like fundamental characteristics of these leaders that are running these really impact-driven organizations. It obviously makes sense when you kind of reflect on it. But in terms of common characteristics of men and women, empathy and compassion is a more common characteristics, personality trait and common characteristic of women than it is of men. Now, as a result of that, and again, I'm probably going to get slammed for this and in trouble or whatever, but it's encouraging then to see that there are pathways for young women to be able to take on these leadership roles of these very innovative startup entities will enable us to see the changing kind of the changing nature of leadership. And we might have more empathy and more compassion in our leaders moving forward. So again, I've put a few things together there, but what's your take on seeing young women involved in leadership positions such as this?
Yeah. So I'm going to step a moment and talk a little bit about that whole piece around diversity, equity and inclusion and the difference it makes in boardrooms. Because actually, there's a lot of research that's been done. For example, McKinsey, they recognize that where you have female leadership in boardrooms, it's something like a 30% improvement against their improvement and overperformance compared to their average median of their peers in the same sector. So you get a lot more performance
across all metrics.
Across absolutely all yeah, exactly. And their study, I think it was 1,635 companies that they studied across this to be able to get to that number where they've defined that. But there's also some really interesting research from EduMe that talks about if you've got ethical and diverse leadership boards, which includes female as well as people from different ethnicities, you are 70% more likely to attract and capture new markets. So that's extraordinary. And it makes perfect sense because actually if you've got broader perspectives and you're getting away from groupthink of like everything going to this narrow view, then you're much more likely to, open opportunities, but also you're much more likely to be speaking to people who are to more of the more people that are reflective of the society and the communities that you're trying to work with. So I think it's really encouraging to see both from the Reuters list of these female leaders, doing very well, but actually more broadly across all businesses, we're now seeing that actually, if you can have female leadership on boards, then it tends to lead to better decision making. It tends to lead to, it's a different voice in the room. It's a different perspective. And it's kind of so often in businesses, and I've worked, as I say, for one of the very large FTSE 100 companies for a number of years, but it can be quite, you can have some characters, not all business, but you can have some characters are very kind of domineering and they feel that this is the way it needs to be done. That's the only way it needs to be done. And as a result, people can't offer up solutions. And of course, you want to have as many solutions as possible to get to the better, the best solution, to encourage better problem solving. So just by having those, you talk about empathy and compassion, but actually you do need to have a culture that allows people to feel that they can talk about things. You have to have an area of listening, that there's a preparation that, yeah, okay, I can hear that and I can consider that and I can come back on that. But actually you do need to have that listening culture as well, so that people can speak up and say, oh, I've come up with this idea. There's these things you absolutely need to make it work.
And out of interest, Veronica, on that point, and playing devil's advocate, if you like, or sort of viewing it from the other end, like you make it such a compelling argument as to why you as an organization would clearly look to engage with different perspectives and different viewpoints. And I guess in particular relating to the article, like engaging with, the youth within an organization, if you like, and their thinking and their innovative solutions, if you like. Now, why don't all companies do that? Like, what is it that's stopping those companies from engaging in that way?
It's a really good question. And I think so often it is because when things have been done a certain way for a long time, people are comfortable doing it that way. And this is kind of like, this is the way we do things around here. But actually, what we need is we almost need a transdisciplinary way of thinking about things. So, you need the creative people, you need the different ways of thinking about a particular issue, and you need to have those voices coming through, which is why I'm talking about listening, because by having all the different voices that come to something, you're going to get a different outcome, and it might just change perspectives on a possible problem that has been, just been difficult to sort out for a period of time. The reason why people often don't do it is sometimes it can be that they've got their stake in the ground. They say, well, this is my territory. This is how it is. This is how it's always been. This is how it's going to be. And that can be a real barrier, and that can be a real problem to overcome, because it's also can be a confidence thing. Because if people are feeling that lots of younger people are coming through with all these fresh ideas, all this sort of stuff, they can also be worried about whether they have a place in the organization. Is it still an organization for them if it's always been like this and now it's changing with all these different voices and people saying these things that they perhaps are not familiar with? And an example of this, I was chatting with a lovely friend and colleague who was basically saying that he recognizes, and he's an older gentleman, he says he recognizes that he's kind of slightly out of the kind of like the thrust and the swiftness of the workforce. So he really is paying attention to listening much more, because he recognizes that he now needs to keep up, because technological changes, we've got so much that's happening so quickly. And typically a lot of younger people will be more abreast and possibly more comfortable with that, take that on more immediately. And so, you have to kind of keep up, basically. You do have to keep up.
How incredibly refreshing that colleague that you've mentioned to have that kind of mindset. Like, that's, you're so right. The fear and the ego, it's almost at the more tragic end, it's fear of losing my position or losing my significance. And at the sort of the worse end, if you like, it's ego associated with upholding the status quo because I want to feel powerful and important. And those are two equally damaging positions to have. But your colleague, that's the way to think, isn't it? To say, look, there's an opportunity to acknowledge where I am, acknowledge what I can contribute, and then learn as much as I possibly can from these new sources to try and, upskill myself and make myself more aware. Veronica, I want to talk about, because we've brilliantly not talked about your book for the first 43 minutes of the show. So I'm keen to talk about your show, to talk about your book. What role does the whole engagement with different perspectives on decision making and supporting different perspectives, etc. What role does that have within the sustainability playbook? Is it something that's featured?
Yes. So stakeholder engagement is what we're talking about when you say what role. So there's a whole piece on stakeholder engagement. So in the sustainability playbook, the aim for it is a compendium that looks at a whole range of different topics. So effectively, if you are a project manager and you kind of needed to get an understanding about a particular issue, this is what the sustainability playbook goes into. So it covers things like leadership and influence, systems thinking, explaining what systems thinking is. I say that because so often when I work with some of the universities, I get the lecturers to say, explain in a nugget, what is it? And they're like, oh, well, and I thought we really need to make this really crystal clear so that people can start to benefit from it and also get that that collaborative role that systems thinking delivers. But
and Veronica, I'm sorry, I've got to catch you on that then. For those listeners who are now listening and going, yeah, what is systems thinking? Just explain it to us.
All right. Okay. Well, so systems thinking, I love systems thinking because it's the background. I'll tell you briefly, the background for it, it comes from a whole host of different areas of thinking. So things like biomechanics, engineering, it comes from a whole range. There's like about sort of probably about 10 disciplines that it comes from. But in essence, what it is, it's about being able to zoom out, to take a really big, broad picture and look at something and then work out, okay, what are the interdependencies or codependencies and what are the interventions that you're going to need to do to make something work more productively or work in a different way. So that's literally in a sentence, that's what systems thinking is. It's zooming out, looking at all of the really big picture of what's going on and working out, okay, these actors, that interdependency, that codependency, what is the thing we now need to do to now make that change? So there's a chapter on that.
And is that essentially, just again, because now I'm jumping into like using this as a lesson for myself, but is this sort of the impact of systems thinking mean that you stop making decisions in isolation of awareness of impact that's going to have upon other aspects of the organization?
Exactly. And there's a lot of different strands to it, and I recognize I'm really summarizing it just into a few sentences. But within the book, it goes into a lot more content in terms of cause and causality, and cause and correlation, and all of the sort of different steps that you need to think about. But also, it highlights the importance to your original question about the role of people and hearing different voices. So within systems thinking, that's a really crucial point because you need to have the stakeholder engagement, you need to have the feedback loops, you need to make sure that you've got, you're really listening and hearing from a lot of different voices and that you are being able to play and respond to those things.
Fascinating. Okay, brilliant. And just for... Yeah, and I know I'm asking you now to give like a full, contents, if you like, of a full book. But just to give our listeners a flavour of what else is sort of covered in the Sustainability Playbook, just give us a synopsis. Okay,
all right. So basically, what the Sustainability Playbook is it's recognising that there's some big picture stuff that's out there, and we need to make some changes, and we need a plan to do it, but you need a plan that's going to work. So what the Sustainability Playbook does is goes through all these sort of different chapters. So it talks about things such as carbon and the net zero agenda, systems thinking, as mentioned, leadership and influence, communication, stakeholder engagement, all the different things. The importance of lessons from the natural world is a brilliant, really wonderful piece. And actually, within the Sustainability Playbook, there's a lot of interviews. It includes interviews and case studies from people like the broadcaster Channel 4, from the global leader Xerox, from the award-winning brewer and distiller Adnams, from the International Union of Cinemas, the Coca-Cola Company, award-winning architects and master planners Stephen George and Partners. There's loads and loads of interviews and case studies, and it's really a playbook with exercises at the end of each chapter that allows people to think, okay, well, I've read all of that. Okay, now how could I apply that to my circumstances and in my particular business or what I'm doing? There's also a really useful ESG model in there. So for people who have never kind of gotten into this space, there's a really useful ESG model that shows you how to actually start applying this in a meaningful way. So it's the intention is, and I said it at the beginning, none of us lives forever. My view is to share what I have and get it into the hands of people so that they can actually use it in their own circumstances, in their own way, to make sure we're building making tomorrow better than it is today, basically. And that's a really fundamental challenge because at the moment, the way things are heading, if we're not careful, there's this kind of certain amount of sort of rolling back on doing things. We don't need to do this, we don't need to do that. But we absolutely need to keep moving forward. And, bearing in mind how many people are on the planet, we've got more people coming on the planet. We need to make sure we've got work and welfare for all. We've got to make sure that we're doing things in a really constructive and productive way that as many people as possible benefit and that we're not excluding, because that's part of the challenge as well, where effectively you find that those who have do better, and then you've got this sort of division between the haves and the have-nots. And if we're not careful, we can see an increasing amount of that. So the idea behind the sustainability playbook is really taking people through some of that thinking with very practical, clear language, very easy to read, lots of vignettes, lots of insights, tools, exercises, and just thought-provoking questions that help people to sort of apply the knowledge and hopefully get better at doing stuff.
Sold. Absolutely sold. Thanks, Veronica. That was absolutely brilliant. We'll obviously link to various materials and share the sustainability playbook with our listeners. I've got one more question before we head to Magic Wand, although I do feel like you've just done a big old crescendo sort of Magic Wand there anyway. But the experience of writing a book, because this is your first book, is that correct?
It is. Yeah, I've written many articles over the years and been published in magazines and various things, but this is the first book. I've published an extract of very specifically on belonging, because a very big piece is around belonging. I didn't mention that, but there's a whole piece on belonging and diversity, equity, and inclusion, a deeper dive. But I've published a special edition piece, which was specifically for the City of London audience, which has been really, really well received. And it was a way of me sort of testing how it is all going. But yeah.
Very good. And so my question for you on the authoring side, would you do it again? Have you enjoyed the process?
I definitely would. I enjoyed the process. It's one of those things that you just need to be very, especially when you're, I'm not in the position where I have been able to just stop everything and just write a book. That's not because, it's had to be fitted into everyday things. And like when I'm on the train, I would be writing when I'm on the train and things like that. And you kind of find a way that's going to work for you in terms of doing it. But again, back to consistency. If you can be consistent, then you've got an opportunity to start building on each of the pieces that you're doing. But I would definitely do it again.
Very interesting. Okay, well, we'll look forward to getting you back on for another show where we can introduce that book too. But Veronica, can you believe we've rattled through a full show already? We're going to conclude now with the Magic Wand question.
Okay.
And again, you've kind of you sort of began to introduce a few very Magic Wandy kind of concepts, I think, throughout the show. So I'm interested to see what you choose to do with it. But if I was to hand you a magic wand right now, you could change one thing about the commercial world in an instant. What would that one thing be?
Oh my goodness. What would that one thing be? I'm probably going to go completely what you wouldn't expect me to say now.
Oh, I love that.
Okay. I'm going to say in the commercial world, my magic wand would be, money isn't everything. Is there another way? Could we be interacting in a different way so that actually the money as the driver isn't the only thing that gets recognized and rewarded?
Very interesting. Well, this is a magic wand, so obviously the magic element is that the wand is able to come up with a sensible suggestion on how we actually apply it. But let me ask you this question on that. I'm finding it, I'm just going to be really honest, I'm finding it increasingly uncomfortable to talk about, when people talk about profit, the role of profit and the role of that fitting within a responsible, sustainable kind of system. Do you believe that profit and sustainability can truly coexist?
Yes, I do. And, because our current system is that money is the currency that we use to do everything, and that's how we trade, that's how we value things, etc. But I'm just posing the question, with my magic wand, if we thought about things being more sort of that we started valuing collective rather than competition, if we valued things in a slightly different way. But yes, we do absolutely. I mean, it's back to that old Friedman comment, is it Friedman comment, which is that the first role of business is to make a profit, and then you can do everything after that. And there's absolutely true, because that's what our system is today. But the question is, if we didn't have money, what would we have, and how could we actually, look at ancient civilizations, and you had bartering, you had different ways of working, so that actually you thought about the many rather than the few, because ultimately this is kind of like, if you like, pie in the sky to a degree for where we are now with the way that our systems work and our economic systems work, etc. But we do need to think about things differently. We really, really do need to think about things differently. And just as an aside, I mean, I am doing quite a lot at the moment, just sort of looking at things like it's been in the news recently about rare earth minerals and what's happening in the political world, etc. But equally, because we value money and we value money and the sort of like those sorts of assets as the primary thing, we will go anywhere as societies. We will go anywhere to get that, even if that means going to space to get rare minerals. We literally will go for anything. So I think and for so much of the space of sustainability, we kind of think about the sort of like the planetary boundary model, and that's quite right. But actually, there's so much more that's happening now, and so I think there's more that's emerging. So, but to stick to the question of my magic wand is that I would question whether we can look at things in a different way.
I love it, Veronica. It's been an absolute delight, as expected, to have you on the show. I hope you've agreed. I hope you've enjoyed yourself too.
I've loved it, Charlie. I've loved it.
For doing this.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Super questions. And lovely. Look forward to catching up more. Thank you so much.
And that's it for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Veronica Heaven, founder of the Heaven Company, board member, ESG specialist, and DEI chair, for joining me on today's show. We explored key takeaways from the article Climate Future Leaders 2024, 10 Young People Who Are Putting the Planet First, celebrating the next generation of climate champions and discussing how organizations can foster young leadership, amplify youth voices, and unlock bold innovation in sustainability. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by the Andrew Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit andrewgreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.